Well, hello again. Hopefully, you had a nice little break. Maybe you checked up on some follow up from the last talk. Looked forward to what was coming up next. Well, uh, one of the things that I think is a great new way of thinking about the infrastructure, the services that you provide, the platforms, if you will, is to really consider who the customers of that are and the stakeholders, and to more start thinking about infrastructure you're providing as a product, which is coincidentally, not actually coincidentally, I know what talk is up next the a good a similar thing to what you'll see in the next talk is really going over an example of how if you think about your infrastructure as a product, uh, fabulous things happen. So let's check it out.
Everybody, welcome to our Spring One presentation, Driveway to Highway, Driving Outcomes with Infrastructure as Product. I'm Scott Hyland. I have a background in federal and defense work and infrastructure security platforms and applications. I manage a team of folks who help VMware customers develop platform strategies to support their developers and end users.
Hi, everyone. I'm Heather Romero. I'm one of the product managers for the Section 31 Kobayashi Maru infrastructure team. So to kick off our presentation, let's talk about user-centeredness. When you're designing and building your infrastructure, you want to treat it as a product, just as a development team treats their software as a product. And as an agile leader, you're passionate about knowing where you want to travel next. Some ways you can ensure frequent feedback loops with your stakeholders is having regular interviews with them, as well as having regular sync ups to gather their feedback on the work that you're doing. This continuous communication will help you get to your destination safely and on time. You can empower your team by taking the time to review those interview results and participating in those stakeholder sync-ups so that together you can strategize how to prioritize that user feedback data back into your backlog. Building trusting relationships is crucial to delivering value. When you're driving the bus, being available to work directly with your passengers is a great start to acquiring that trust. That way you know in which direction you and your users need to drive. You'll want to cultivate a culture where you and your team respond to your users in an efficient and consistent way, such as with email, phone, or a chat tool. Ensure your team has a great relationship with the support desk team because they should know when a tier 1 trouble ticket should become a story for the infrastructure. If you're part of a startup or a small business, maybe you have a regular rotation where one person or a pair is dedicated to the support desk team for a week or a day at a time. That way the entire team can find their trends and user pain points and identify opportunities to reduce toil. A long time ago, waterfall roadmaps were defined by executives external to the team. They used to center around a lengthy requirements list focused on scheduled outputs and big bang delivery dates that were 1 year or sometimes even longer than that. This method of planning, though, doesn't consider that we cannot predict the future. Things happen, such as worldwide pandemics, economies crash, there are shifts in war fighting, and technology evolves, offering new opportunities like the internet or cloud computing. How quickly can your team respond to change and unplanned events? When we focus on providing outcomes to our users rather than outputs, we learn to what end we're building our product, and our teams can better understand the why of the work that we're doing. The purpose of outcome-oriented roadmaps is to communicate direction, strategic initiatives of the product or the business, and moving towards those initiatives for both our teams and our stakeholders. Reviewing the roadmap regularly with your team at weekly planning meetings or when you meet with your fellow PMs and management will allow the opportunity to bring everyone together and aligning towards similar objectives. Continuously chunking down your roadmap into epics or goals will help your team achieve those outcomes. So if you're in a convoy of vehicles all driving to the same destination, your cars may take different stops along the way. And as a product manager, you know each of these cars has a different set of expertise. One car may include your network engineers, while the other car may include your masters of storage or virtualization. Ensuring your team swaps vehicles every now and then will help them transfer knowledge and increase their understanding of the entire architecture rather than only just their piece. An example of an MVP is with the Section 31 Kobayashi Maru organization for the Space Force. Our infrastructure MVP was built and accredited in about 6 months to get the first application, now known as Spaceport, into production. Now, our team is working to increase reliability and availability to enhance our users' experience as they perform their missions in the space domain. Engineers love to engineer. So when you're working on your roadmap, recognize when and for how long to perform engineering deep dives.
Thanks, Heather. So how can we deliver value more consistently? Consider traveling in shorter trip segments. Timelines in infrastructure tend to be longer since things like data center planning, tech refreshes, network upgrades, and patching tend to happen at a lower frequency, but we can begin to change the long lead times to allow us to be more flexible. Do lightweight collaborative planning, deliver incremental value, validate that effort with your users on a weekly basis, and then wash, rinse, repeat. You'll get higher speed and better results, and this is key. The risk you accumulate of having done the wrong thing is never more than a week's worth of effort. It's important to learn to love change. Treat it as a mechanism for enablement and develop a practice around how you can switch contexts effectively. Things are going to break, so you shouldn't be planning for perfection. But by building reliability through resilience and recovery, you'll get yourself into a better place. You should remember that 100% uptime is an expensive myth, but stability is agility. Your infrastructure is a product consumed by your users. Embrace changing your product in service to their evolving needs. Their success is your success. And the core of product thinking is building a user-centric, data-driven practice to direct efforts at the tasks which deliver the most value to your stakeholders. One last note to help you with some task priorities, especially in infrastructure, to help you put effort where it's most needed. Are you doing it daily? Automate it. Are you doing it annually? Usually just document the process and move on.
When standing up a new team, or if your team has been through several recent changes, it's important to carve out a good amount of time to realign with each other on how your team performs their work. This will help make sure everyone understands your team culture and can help pave the way for how your team will see value in your ceremonies. Your planning meetings are iteration planning or sprint planning meetings, and Scott and I recommend they occur weekly or biweekly, but no less frequently than that. Otherwise, your risk cliff begins to accumulate. When you have your ceremonies, you really want to focus on how IPM, stand-up, retro, demo provide feedback into guiding your roadmap. For example, your team's demos should share the benefits or the failures after they run experiments, and you take meaningful action to communicate these results to your leadership. We highly recommend stand-ups go no longer than 15 minutes every day. You may have one or two engineers that want to begin solutioning in the middle of stand-up. And as an agile leader, you just want to make sure that you refocus that conversation into a sidebar, or you ask them to pair on that later on. So think about adding documentation as part of your regular acceptance criteria during your planning meetings, and include the location of that documentation as a note in the story. You can also make it part of your team's routine to include inline documentation in the scripts. That way they spread that knowledge to each other and directly into the Git repo. As an agile leader, you always want to make sure you continuously enable your team. Is it built in your team's culture to communicate blockers as soon as possible? Communicating blockers should be identified in both your work tracker, but also as well as discussing them in your daily stand-ups. Otherwise, you're probably doing something wrong. And as an agile leader, you want to make sure your engineers trust that you're working with the other product managers and your portfolio leadership team, if that exists, to help unblock them before getting to the point of having to push the panic button. Most IT folks working in agile environments love learning new technologies, but maybe others don't. As a servant leader, how can you foster continuous learning for everybody on your team? Maybe your infrastructure team is looking at replacing one system logging tool with another, You'll want to make sure you consider whether or not you have enough information from your team and your stakeholders on pursuing this new technology. Pairing has proven to be vital in sharing knowledge all across the team. You can use pairing strategies such as driver navigator and enabling your team to drive in shifts, as well as pairing with other teams to cultivate collaborative decision making. Enabling your team to perform demos will help give them recognition, share knowledge to other team members, but it also provides a nice sense of accomplishing something valuable for your users. Being agile means having the ability to work quickly and easily, ensuring a healthy communication flow between all of the dev, sec, and ops teams will help provide a seamless path to production. So in the spirit of agility, collaborate with your fellow leaders to make sure the path to prod is as simple as possible. Does your team even know what your organization's path to prod is? Do your users? And if you and your team do know what your path to prod is, you'll want to make sure your team has repeatable processes in place to support that. Speed limits. Embed security throughout the entire journey of your infrastructure. Shifting security and compliance to the left as much as possible allows you to avoid major traffic jams later down the line, or even worse, right before deploying to production. Sometimes you'll receive new information from your stakeholders or need to prioritize troubleshooting an emergency issue over working on a new capability that causes your team to have to shift some work around. Be prepared for that to happen. Know that it's going to happen. So repeatable processes will help you respond in an agile way. Knowing the limitations and the capacity of your team are really going to help here. In an agile environment, you want to burn stories down as quickly as possible, but without burning out your team. In IT, you want to automate everything as much as possible. Look at your team as a set of infrastructure developers. The work that they do with automation at the infrastructure level to write code that builds a repeatable and reproducible infrastructure are going to burn down toil wherever that infrastructure lives.
So we know that it's reckless to drive without gauges, mirrors, a windshield, or headlights. So your vehicle needs those things. But you also know that some of your instruments matter more than others. How can you tell? Consider whether your passengers care more about your tire pressure, your fuel level, or your washer fluid level. Not to beat a broken down Bronco, but you need to talk to your users. They often care about things you haven't considered because they trust you to take care of the details like fuel level and tire pressure. But if they want to see out of the windshield, for them, it's more important that you keep the washer fluid full. Depending on your infrastructure's complexity, you might need to choose a unique route or set of gauges, but refined user-centric observability will always be worth the effort of having developed it. Prioritize building metrics for you that help you support your end users' needs, as well as building metrics for your end users that do the same. When you get good at user-centric metrics and build good monitoring and alerting practices around them, your team will be in the enviable position of not just knowing where you are, but where you're going, and developing a good understanding of how soon you can get there. You'll also find that your high beams will reveal potential obstacles like capacity and scaling issues sooner, feeding back into your road mapping and planning processes. All right, so you've developed some awesome chrome-plated, backlit, slick-looking user-centric metrics. Let's use them. Combining some reliability engineering principles and our vehicle metaphor, let's say your service level indicator is fuel level, and your service level objective is the point at which the low fuel light comes on. And your error budget is to only let the fuel light come on twice during your trip. You can allow yourself room to change or innovate within that error budget. Let's say visiting that off the beaten track attraction will mean that you'll run low on fuel before you get to the next gas station. But that's okay, it was worth it. You're still within your error budget, you didn't run out of gas. Change is risky, but the stagnation of parking your car in the middle of the highway is worse. So exercise your ability to innovate. There is one type of change that usually helps shore up your ability to meet service level objectives instead of putting your error budgets at risk. And that is addressing technical debt more frequently. It's just like vehicle maintenance. You can't ignore your oil changes, fail to keep your insurance up to date, or let your registration expire. Complexities in infrastructure management often put us into the habit of manual toil to alleviate technical debt in a reactive, roadside assistance way. Automation is an investment of your time that pays down the principal on your tech debt. It's a good practice to prioritize at least some reduction of toil and tech debt on a weekly basis. The more frequently you do it, the better you get at it. And let's talk for a minute about the driving conditions. Not to drag out the metaphor, but we need to admit that it's far too late for that. Your average day and the way you would normally prioritize your work is probably like driving in sunny, clear weather. At least I hope it is. Rain might mean some complications and you have to adjust for minor blockers. If you're from somewhere that folks don't know how to deal with snow, you get that it can mean a hideously painful time getting things done. So it's important to recognize and adapt to cycles and situations that affect your priorities or drive your behaviors in different ways. Then include that, as well as you can, into your roadmaps and planning. You can still work in an agile and flexible way, but that doesn't mean you should be blindsided. The better you are at combining your current situational awareness and visibility into cycles in your business, the better you'll be able to negotiate surprises like leadership changes or mandated migrations. It's especially important in infrastructure to get out of the reactive roadside assistance mode. And one last word on conditions. Different environments and architectures have built-in limitations and blockers. Again, learning to expect change and prioritize effectively will help you deliver better outcomes to your stakeholders more consistently. And so, in conclusion, the need to travel never ends. And what would we like you to remember about your own infrastructure journey? Talk to your users, implement a feedback loop, build things for them, and talk to them again. This builds trust. Short iterations create value early and often and reduce the risk of wasted effort. Balance planning in favor of execution. Plan only as much as is needed because plans change and a roadmap should not be an atlas. Enable your team and empower them to do great things. Don't simply manage them. Build user-centric metrics that matter to your stakeholders. Prioritize ruthlessly using those metrics in their input. And then automation and toil reduction, especially around tech debt, are sometimes the same thing. And it's important to always make a little time for both.
All right, thanks for joining us today. You can find Scott and I both on LinkedIn. We'd love for you to join us in the Q&A afterwards.
Yes, thank you so much.
Well, I hope you like that. I thought it was pretty interesting, as always. But to tell you, if you haven't seen another session, there's about a 15-minute Q&A that you can go to. If you go to the Slack channel for this talk, which is, and get ready, Session Driving Outcomes with Infrastructure as a Product, you can find the link to that, and you can ask any questions that you might have, discuss things, and get even more information about thinking about what you're doing as a product. So we'll have a short break, and then we'll be back with another talk coming up. And just as a hint, it's a little bit about metrics and measuring, knowing that you're doing the right thing by coming up with a way of keeping track of it. So enjoy a tiny break.